What? I still don't know how to do
We just have
PHP.
1 hour remain now.
Do I have connection?
For
Yeah.
the library is closed.
Before
They closed at 8.
No, they close later.
Later?
It's just that people leave, like there won't be any people downstairs,
Yeah, okay.
but it will still be open. Okay, so now,
Recording?
yeah, I'm recording. So now for this part, we will we'll try to create a little bit more dynamic data. And actually, on the examples,
I have a question for you.
yeah.
Since let's say we're passing props, because that's what I was gonna try to do, but before I spend too much time on it, I'll ask you that. Let's say when you start fetching data, can you actually create, let's say, a component like on a file just for that, just to fetch the data and pass that into the rest of the application, like
Depends.
a single point to fetch. Because what I read is like, I read some posts online and said, yeah, it looks like React, you pass around data all over the place, and sometimes it's like, there's several ways to fetch the data.
Yeah.
Some ways is like you fetching the data like several times. So I was thinking, okay,
It depends a lot. There is a lot of ways of fetching data, and depends also how big things are as well. For instance, what we are doing here on this application, it's a very small application that basically only has to list repositories, and okay, but this maybe should not be at the root one, at the Git home. It should be on the repositories, because in real life, those would be the ones actually fetching the data, right? Unless, for instance, this name here also would come from the same API, right? If we have an API that we call and we fetch the data. So it will always depend like who needs the data, because of course it's always easier to fetch it only once and then propagate it around than to actually have a function, and then if this component needs something, calls it. If this one needs something, calls it. Then you're gonna have a lot of calls on your website being made. Every component is making, and they are only using a small amount of the data, right?
Yeah.
So, and again, that depends a lot. Like, there is no correct solution, because it depends how big your application is, and the correct solution right now might not be the one in 5 months. And yeah, it's a bit.
How the inspector of that, when you call the data from, some of them they just make it one API and just put all the data inside, so you can fetch everything in one time. And some of them they divide it.
Yeah.
So it's also depends on that.
But again, for instance, having one component responsible for data fetching only, usually, like, you see that in different types of data fetching, but usually we would not do that. We would fetch it in one place where we have to use it. For now, again, it depends a lot of the use case. That's always the big problem, is what are you trying to achieve? Because, yeah. No, okay. So now on our repositories, so we have all this data here, right?
Repositories.
And then down here we are just mapping through whatever we get, right? So if we want to add a new repository, we need to add it here manually, right? And we would like to click and add, or have an input form where we can just add a new repository.
This is when I was kind of like sketching out your example there. I noticed that the repos, they are being passed around on the exports, but they have to. Then I was thinking, I said, okay, that the whole thing gets read at once, right? So you have it on the Git home. So it wouldn't work. Let's say if you call, it wouldn't work if you put the array on the repository or repositories and then call it on Git home. Would that work? No.
You mean move this to the other file?
Yeah.
Yes, but then.
Then you have to pass. Then you have to pass that on.
No, then we would remove this as props, because then we don't need it here.
Okay.
So we would just put it here and remove it from here.
Because it's sitting on the same file.
Yeah, it still works. and all the functionality should still work because that's someone else's responsibility. So where this comes from right now, it's not important. And again, the reason why I'm doing it on a Git home is for the next part only, because in reality, I would put them here because this is the one consuming them. So, but for instance, right now we are going to mix a little bit of props and state because, as I said, we do have this list of repositories, but we want to be a bit more dynamic so we can add more repositories. So for that is no different than a button. We know the button is somewhere here on the repository, and we use it as a state, right? We start the.
It makes no difference because it's not consuming the anything from the array.
Now, what in here we would like to do is that actually instead of mapping through the props that we are sending, we will do something a little bit different, and the result will be the same in the beginning. So instead of that, we will actually say use state, and we will pass the repos inside of the state as a first value. So
Mark, can I have a question?
yeah.
How come you can access the variable on GitHub when in fact you haven't imported it? You did not import it in repositories.
Which one?
The variable on GitHub, like the repos and the repos.
No.
You did not import it on the
This one here.
Repositories.
Yeah, it's because in here I'm just asking for name and description. I'm not. I don't care if it's a repository or not technically.
I mean on repositories.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can access the repos, but you did not import it.
No, because it's being passed as a property.
Oh.
It's being passed here.
Okay.
So
it's just a parameter that you
yeah,
can
it's just a simple parameter. Again, this one right now is hard coded, but eventually it will be called from an API or something like that.
No, that parameter that's being passed the repos.
Vi gør opmærksom på, at biblioteket overgår til selvbetjening om 5 minutter. Your attention, please. The library's unstaffed opening hours will start in 5 minutes.
Okay, so on a GitHub, I'm passing this repos array that has a lot of them, and now in here I'm actually using state again, and I'm saying that this repository list, which is a new word, I want to have the value of the repos. And I want to create a function called set repository. Repositories, maybe, yeah. And it's like that because I'm not using, that's why there is an error here. Like I have it there, but I'm not using it. So in here, I'm console logging what do I get there, and I get 3 objects. And when I look at it, it's exactly the ones I'm passing down. If we console log the repos, it's exactly the same. I mean, we are not doing any change to anything. Mm-hmm. But now this means that instead of using the properties, and again, the properties can only be changed once the website loads. So it can only be changed when you're coding, basically. So instead of doing that, I'm actually going to use state here. I'm no longer using repos. Now I'm using the repository list from state, and nothing happened because it just should work as expected. Like this one or this one are exactly the same on the first load, and I'll try to explain that. So now we will create a button here saying add one more, and then on click function. No, not like that. Come on. I'll create a handler for it. Handler click. Just so that I don't have a lot of code down here. Okay, now there is a button all the way down there. We can maybe lower this down. Okay, this one doesn't load. Like this, okay. So log repository list, just to have an idea of what's happening, and I will use here instead so we can actually see. So now, for instance, if I click add one more, it's just to make sure that things are happening. Like the code I just did works, because whenever I click on this button, this function gets called, and that's what I want. Now, I have this one here, but as I told you before, we should never change state directly. That's why we get this function here, so that we can update the state whenever we want. So we can always say set repositories, and now this is the hard part, because we need the how would it be the easiest one? Repository list, right? Plus I don't know, let's just try. What was the name I gave? Name and description. Description temp as well. Now this might not work because it might not be how we add that. Okay, yeah, it actually removed the whole thing. Yeah, it's because there is an array of an array of an array. Oh, yeah. So I will just make things a bit prettier and try to explain it. New repository equals name view and description. This is very new, and now in here I'm just passing it as new repository. And I will log after I do things so that we can actually see what happened. So now when we load our app, it adds a new repository. And now this is a mix of static stuff and dynamic stuff, because as you can see here, we have these ones that are hardcoded, like they are handwritten here. And every time we refresh the page, they do not change. They're always there because we wrote them there on purpose. And now this one comes in because it's state only. So for instance, if you visit the website, you will actually not see it because it's only, like it's me adding it here, like on my page only. You will see only these ones. And actually we can even just try that. As you can see, it's the same exact website. And now in here, I can add this. And in here, nothing changes because this is state. This is only changing on the client part of it. And again, it did not make sense to do that, what we are doing right now, because again, we are not saving it back. We are just changing the state of the application. So for this example, yes, it is stupid. It's not what we want, but it's just to understand that we can have both things. We can start an application with what's there, and then we can always, which is called props, and then we can always pass those props as state, and from there on we can manipulate it in this place. And in here, basically what we did, we pass whatever we get to this use state, and now we are using this value instead of repos. And we have this function where we can update this value. All the way down there, we have a button that handles the click. And that's I always like to write the handlers or functions here so that I don't worry, like that's HTML. I don't worry with it. So every time we click a button, we create this const with the name is always the same. We should change this, of course, so that it will be different. And now here, again, we cannot change this value. We cannot say concatenate. I mean, technically we can, but we shouldn't, because that's why we have this function, is to change the state. We should not change it like that. So basically in here I'm saying, give me the objects. That's basically what this ... does it say, give me the objects that are from here, which basically are these ones at the first, and add this one on the array. So I'm deconstructing and constructing an array at the same time here. So I'm saying, give me the objects and add this object into this big array. And that's why the first time we click, it gets whatever we got plus 1. And the second time we click, it gets whatever we got plus whatever we already changed plus another one.
What if you want to delete one?
That's another 20 lines of code.
Just pop.
Then we would have to find on the array exactly which one we want to delete. I mean, depends.
Yeah, but I mean just there. I'm speaking about the part set repository, and you make 3 bots so you can just get the object how it is.
Oh yeah, in that case you would assign it to a variable, like to an array, and delete.
And then what you write in the next?
And then set there. Wait, for instance, we can do that.
Because
So-
just make it like a comma and a new repository, so you just add it.
Yeah, but for instance, let me just duplicate this.
Kat is still thinking about that function that she has to work on it tomorrow.
Yeah, I've been working for many days now, actually. But only Monday and Tuesday I have really a full time. Because last week I was still busy.
Not array, new value equals this one. Because the main problem, for instance, on deleting, is that we cannot change this, because this is the state, we should never change it. But we can always assign to a different one, for instance, as we are here, and then we say a new value dot is pop, right? A new value dot length. And then we can set repositories with the new value. Now let's see if this works. So when we add one, it added. When we delete it, what did happen? Nothing happened. Console log. Are we calling the handle delete? Yes, we are. New value. So add one, delete one. Why didn't it update the state? Is it because we need to do this? Or is it because we are trying to remove something we can't? Yeah, okay, yeah, now it is. Yeah, it's because I was trying to set an array of array, basically. It's because, yeah, this one requires an array, so, and yeah. So basically in here what we are doing is that we are assigning the state to a, whatever state it is, to a new array. And now with this one, we can always use the set repositories that we will update every time somebody clicks something.
And then you use this, that's the spread operator, isn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah,
To assign
which is
to-
basically what we are doing here. It's the same thing.
You're just creating an array with whatever comes
Yeah.
in, and you just put it in spread over.
So for instance,
It was just my question. When you make a comma and you write the new object, it's just always add.
oh yeah, in here, yes, because this is the first item in the array. And I'm quoting first because actually we know it has 3 items inside from the beginning. So it's just basically saying whatever is here, put it in the beginning of the array, and then this one putting it after. I mean, it's
So it automatically pushes new
Yeah.
data. It's called spread
It's-
syntax.
yeah.
Yeah,
it's the same as here. In here we are actually saying concat this array to that array, which means like insert it. I think concat should work. I'm not sure now. But for instance, when so we have temp equals, and this will be an array 1, 2, 3, right? Now we have temp. It's 1, 2, 3. This is no different than what we wrote. We just wrote a square brackets, which means this is an array, right? When we are doing this exact line, it's exactly the same. It's the same we did here. We say this is an array. I mean, of course, that we can always, so that it does not become so complicated. Yeah, move it outside. So, but this is the same thing as temp. Is that an array is brackets and values separated by comma. So,
yeah.
so it's exactly what we are doing here. It's just that in here it's objects instead of numbers. That's no difference at all.
No, I get you.
And yeah, sometimes, like, again, I usually always write this as a parameter because this is an extra line of code that like I'm assigning it to a variable and then putting that variable inside. So usually I would just put this as a parameter because it works. It's not any difference at all.
Now we are listening. Because how I understand it, that the commas mean like plus, whatever you put in
Yeah.
place, you just add
Can you
it.
actually delete it? Now you can delete all of them?
Yeah, because now it's a new value.
Oh,
Because I'm not changing the repository list. I'm changing the new value, which is a copy of repository list. So yes, like this we can just, like now all of them are gone. And now if we add, then it's just the new because that's what we are writing, right? Of course, we can always let me just this dot length so that they look different at least. Undefined. Why is it undefined? Isn't this isn't repository list something? Come on. I need to delete all this stuff so I know exactly what I'm console logging. So if I log here, what do we have here? Whenever we add, we have 3. So you're saying this does not exist? Okay. Yeah, it's because it's an object. So, seriously. No, it's not. Well, but this has to. Okay, let's just. Equals. Now dot push. Maybe I need to clean up a bit. No, this one is this one. So does this still work? Yes. And now, do we have the value here? Still undefined. Okay, this is a good one.
spelling of length?
Why can't we access the length of it?
The length is TH.
Was it that?
Yeah.
Length. Right? Is it correct now?
I think so too. Yeah, it is.
Okay, now it is. Now it works. But then why does it actually show that I can write the other one? That's weird. I won't investigate that.
The auto.
It was the,
That was hard to see.
It's the I always make that same mistake. The length, I always switch the T and the
Yeah,
H.
when he opened the object, I just
You saw the word length. Yeah, it's a spelling mistake.
Yeah,
Well, that can happen.
I always make that mistake too. Always.
Yeah. But again, now we can do whatever we want here. The same way we do this, and as you can see now, this starts to get a little bit bigger, and that's usually how React applications get to. We can, for instance, this star, right? We have them as always starting at 0, but we can always have it somewhere here. Star 0 1 0, and now down here we need to have a star 0 as well. So, and now down here we actually have a star as well, right? We are not using. Now we can actually pass the value of star into the, but we are not passing it here. Yes, that's why. Star equals repo dot star. So now if we visit here, now one of them starts at 1. So again, this is a way of actually starting with some data that makes, let's say, sense to it. Now, of course, that as I say, it's really stupid that we are doing this because this doesn't change anything to other people that are looking at the website. But on this handler here, on this handle delete and handle click, this, for instance, is where you would call an API to say like, oh, somebody added a new one, create a new one on the database. Like somewhere here, you would call the API or a function that then calls the API, depending on the setup. But that would be exactly the place to do it, so that you would change both the API and the user state. And sometimes you might notice that happens a lot. For instance, when you, let's say you create a new account, and usually it always says like your account is created, but it always takes a little bit to actually be active.
Yes.
And that's basically what's happening behind the scenes, is that the state is telling you like everything's fine, but someone else is handling that job for me. So wait a minute. And because it makes it easier to reply to the user, because nobody has patience to wait for anything, right? You want to be notified right away. Did it create it? Yes, it did. But sometimes it didn't really. It's still waiting for the server to actually create, blah, 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 blah. It's just that you have to trust the system behind the scenes, of course. But yes, this is exactly what would happen whenever you click start. And that's why sometimes if you are in a very, very low connection, like on a train somewhere in the middle of Ulan, and you click something, for instance on GitHub, you start a repository, it's like, yeah, it's start. It showed to you that it is, but sometimes it might not be because your connection just went off on this split second after. And then you refresh the page and you already have connection, and then it showed like unstarred. And that was the reason exactly why. It's because the React, or in this case they are not using React, but they are using something similar. The UI is telling you, cool, you clicked here, but something might have been
like
wrong.
when you make comment in Facebook also the same.
Yeah, exactly. If you have very low connection, it shows like, yeah, it's there, but then suddenly you refresh, like, no, it's not there.
No, you don't comment.
Yeah, it's exactly the same way, because again, the state is really good to show the user we are doing things for you, like, trust us.
Yeah.
But then you should make sure that you do things for them. So yeah, and in here we have a situation of starting an application with some data already. Again, some data hard-coded here. That we should not worry for now. Let's forget about the hard-coded data. But we pass that data into the state, and then we can play around with it and do whatever we want with it. And as you can see, we can even just delete the whole thing, but it's not deleted. It's just, we are telling the user, yeah, you deleted it, but now you refresh the page and the data is there again. So it is a bit of a of a weird thing. Now I think
It's
I will.
called fake news.
Yeah. Now we will make a timeout. I don't know if you
Yes.
did that before, probably.
Yeah.
So it's just like every X milliseconds or second, it's milliseconds, right? Yeah, milliseconds does something, right? And I want to change this at some point. So let's just try to do. I'll do it in a header. Okay, now this one is really, really small, but we will just go nuts on it. Oh, I forgot to copy. Okay. What? Sure. Okay, so now in here we will do this same thing. Yeah, let's do the same thing. So title and set title equals use state, and I'll send in the name, and then I will use title in here instead of name. So nothing changed here, we're still good. Now I want to say that once it gets, like every 10 seconds changes the title to something else. So basically we need a set timeout to do that. And that's, for instance, where the use effect comes in use. So it's just so that we can see how this would actually work. So the use effect takes in a function. And the reason why it takes in a function is because we can send parameters here that prevents the whole component to update. And we won't experience that right now, but we will experience it in the future. So for now, I think we're good like this. What's happening here? Why aren't you loading? Okay, you are. Okay, so we will do a set timeout here, and timeout is the same thing, right? It takes a function, I think, isn't it? It's in a function and then does something and then time. Yeah. Okay. So the time will put 5 seconds. Come on, every time I save this happens. Now every time 5 seconds we will set title to title plus. And this would be a bit weird because we won't see it happening. We will only see it one time, right? Yeah. So, okay, let's do this only every 2 seconds. I don't want to wait 5 seconds for it. Okay, so now every 2 seconds it will just add another and another and another and another. I mean, this makes the website really ugly eventually, as you can imagine. But this is a way of using the use effect. It's because again the set timeout needs to run all the time, and yeah, you could argue then why don't I just write it here, right? We will do something like this, and this still works, and there is nothing wrong with it. It's just that the use effect, it's way better to control any side effects, and that's, I think, the name that they gave. I'm not sure.
But why is continuing? We just sit timeout. We don't sit interval.
No, in here, timeout, we kind of makes an interval, because every 2 seconds this will get closed, not closed, called, and that's basically what's happening here.
How we understand set timeout? It's just like after 2 seconds, do something, and that's it.
Yeah.
If you want to do it every 2 seconds, you should set interval.
No, timeout is the same.
I don't, because I remember we said interval. There's a function.
I forget the set interval usage though.
Oh yeah, yeah. That is, wait, actually, let's just see it out here. Because yeah, that is exactly where the use effect comes in, right? Because now it should add 1. No, it keeps adding because we are calling, yeah. Actually, yeah, let me show you. If we send title here, no, title here. Yeah, it keeps adding.
If you can set the time, no.
No, the reason why this is doing that, again, on the hooks is, wait, I'll comment this out so it won't break our application, or just like this.
Okay. So the set timeout will happen after that second will elapse. Well, set interval will always execute with the second that you put. But since it is using did update, that's why it's doing
Yeah.
a lot of things.
For instance,
Always.
But update is like.
but for instance, right now I'm not setting anything on the title. I comment that out. It's very hard to see from here. I'm just console log. That's the only thing I'm doing inside of the set timeout. And I will actually remove this from here because it does nothing now. So what happens here is that after 1 second or 2 seconds, we print it out here. And nothing else happened. It only did once.
Mm-hmm.
But if we do this, now if we load this thing, after 2 seconds, it prints out here and 1 there, and then here 2 times, here 3 times, here 4 times. And the reason why it's doing this is because we are changing the state of the component. And we are saying re-render, re-render, re-render every 2 seconds. So when we get, where was it? Can I open image in a new tab? Yeah. And again, this is not the same idea, but when we get here, and in here it's actually saying like should component update, and that's one of the hooks that, I mean, is no longer hook, or it used to be this thing, but now it's no longer. It's saying there is a new state because we are adding a +1 to the title. So if there is a new state, render again, and render again every time. So the first time the timeout works as a timeout, but that creates so that the component renders again because we are changing something inside of the component, and that's why it goes a bit crazy. So for instance, if we just set,
Marco, if you can set the time out of effect,
it still does it because it changes the state.
I think it will do it one time.
No, as long as it changes the state to something else completely different, it will run more than, like, it will run forever.
Like you make set out a function, and inside it you make update effect.
It will re-render all the time because there is a state change. For instance, right now, I'm setting the title to 1 only. So, yeah, this here will get still print. So the way that what's going to happen is that we'll render the application and it will say it will have the value get home, because that's the first value we're sending, right?
Yeah.
And it will print, this is get home. And then after 2 seconds, we will set the title to 1. And this use effect will keep listening to it. And then after 2 seconds, it will say, oh, set title to 1 again. But the React will say, like, it's already 1. We don't need to set it again. So, and now I'm still printing the value here. So now what's going to happen is after 2 seconds, and now after 2 seconds again, it printed here only, because it said, no, there is no more changes to this application. And now it stopped. Because there is no more changes. Like, we are always trying to set the same state now. And that's, as you can see, how your application can get slow if we do what we were doing before of doing title plus 1. Because this basically will say whatever value was before, now add 1, and now add another 1. So this keeps changing the state every 2 seconds. For instance, if we change this to, this can be a bit crazy. But like, it will go until your browser says, I'm done. Because we are changing everything from the state, basically. It's completely different from the previous state.
So if props, it will not work.
No. I mean, one thing we can do here is that if we can put a condition, of course. Title. Or diff, yeah. This should work, I guess. No, it doesn't, because we still set it and then we cannot catch it the next time. Yeah, I'll stop this part here. So yeah, in this case, again, it will be really, really bad to have something that changes so much, of course. I mean, the best case would be to, actually, I think that's part of the homework, to have like, how long are you on this page? You know, like a timer. That's okay, because it will change, for instance, and that I can give you the solution now. Right? Shouldn't this work? Isn't new date? I think it is. We will wrap this thing into another one. Now time equals time.
Now I remember that I forgot to turn on the lights of the house.
Turn on or off?
Turn on. Yeah, because it's only me
Objects
and the
are not
dog
valid
in the
as
house.
child.
It will be really, really dark.
Oh, that's right. Why is not the time doing that? How do we do time here? Does anyone remember? Yeah, but new date should be. We can just console log time. What do we get? Yeah, why doesn't this get printed? Okay, we'll do seconds then. So we'll start at 0. So this time, this is easier. So now we will have the time just says 0, and now we want that every second to do something. So we're gonna have another set timeout. And now set seconds of seconds plus 1. Now this has a seconds timer. I mean, we could of course use the date to calculate stuff, but this makes it way easier because we know it runs every second, just adds another one. And yeah, you can leave this on your website forever and see how it. I mean, again, you need to look at it because this is state. So this won't only when you are on a website it actually does something. So for instance, if I go here, and maybe this is actually the best way to actually see what state is. As you see, I started a new timer now on this browser, and this has nothing to do with your website. This is all on the browser that's happening. So your server does not get pushed every time that this is happening because this is all client side. This is all on the browser. So you don't have to worry that, oh, people might attack me because I have a timer here. No, this is only for them because every time you refresh, you get 0 again. So yeah, that's one of the use cases of use effect, but it's just because for now we are not fetching any data from an API, but that's the place we will do it anyway. So again, you can always try to figure out something else, but I don't really see anything else except fetching data for now. There is a lot of use cases, it's just that they are not that simple to do on the use effect.
So use effects actually like every while it's look at the browser if there's updated, it will do something?
Yeah, it will always run whatever is inside of use effect. If something changes, that the component got updated, then the use effect will kick in again.
So it can be useful with this to-do list.
Yeah.
Every time you write something inside the box, it will let it out in the list.
Yeah, that's what we will use when we'll go with the what's it called, forms. But again, don't try forms yet.
Yeah, I was going to throw that and get a headache. That's why I changed my mind.
Because it is a bit tricky.
It's very tricky.
For instance, in this case here, they actually use because again, the use effect will get called every time something changes on the application. So on this component, not on the application, but on this component. So for instance, in here, it's a count, right? And every time you click, it sets the count to plus whatever it was, plus 1. It's similar to the star that we have. And then it has a use effect that actually changes the document title. Because every time, like in here we are changing the state, right? We are calling set count, we change the state. So we know every time the state changes, this gets called. You could argue, like, why aren't we actually doing this and this in the same function, right? If we can, like, there is nothing wrong with it. This is just another way of solving the same problem. But it's no different. But yeah, because state is changing, we know use effect is going to get called. We can do whatever we want there as well, and it works fine.
Marco, why again you are passing 0 as parameter for the use state?
It's as a first value.
Initial. So if it's
it
a number,
always
it's 0, or if it's another data type, it's
Or a string you can.
depends what you want to start with.
Ah.
It's a first value, and it has to have. Actually, we can try to see, for instance, here, if we don't send anything, we will probably, yeah,
Okay.
because there is nothing there. So now down here, this gets nothing, and now we are trying to add 1. So
Still nothing.
it always has to have a value.
It just is in the below. Every time you refresh your browser, it will come back to that value.
So, oh, come on. Yeah, okay. Okay, this one will change. 140. So it's a bit different. So yeah, let me just have a look here to see if we forgot something, because then we need to make the list keys we actually talked about already, which is what we talked about, the index and key of mapping through things. For instance, this exact example that we did here in a class component, it would look something very similar to this, except we would not have the component did mount because we have the first value here. So I mean, how can I do it? Okay, const 10. That's it. No, not const. So for instance, let me just copy the whole thingy, paste. We don't need this one. We don't need this one, but we would need this. There is no clicks. State.name. And now in here, instead of that, we will set this dot set state. And now inside of it, we will need a name equals this dot state dot name plus 1.
Is it okay if I don't learn that from?
Yeah, it is.
But classes
Does this
are
work?
really useful.
Name 1
Not here.
1 1 1
Not
1
this
1
one.
1 1 1. Yeah. Okay.
That is important when you want to create an object from the same class.
Yeah, but oh, this is going crazy now. I will stop it. No, it's because, yeah, actually, as you can see, I don't care. So now we have this timeout and use effect. We have this timeout and use effect. And so every 1 second, we add seconds. Every 1.4 seconds, we change this, but this only happens once, as we know. And then down there, I think I put that there every 1 second as well. We do that, but that's not happening every 1 second. That's happened more often. And the reason is, we are calling temp here on this component. And this component gets updated every second. The whole thing, this whole thing, including this one.
Okay.
And because this one also gets updated every 1 second. As you can see, there is a bit of dependency here that, because this one re-renders, that one re-renders as well. Every single time. So it re-renders twice as fast.
Yeah, I think so twice.
And that's basically what's happening here. That's why, like, we go on the number 4, but we already have probably 8 numbers there, because it keeps adding like way faster, because it's the child of a component that is updating every time.
It gets a lot faster.
Yeah, probably it should get even exponentially faster, because it gets 1 extra in every round, which is really bad, as you can see.
Actually, the temp I think will be slower, because after they call it inside, after 1 second it will be called again.
No, because itself calls every second still.
You call it down.
So it's every second plus every half a second from the other one.
I think if you don't have it down, you don't call it down,
Yeah,
then it will be like delay for 1 second. Because,
exactly. If it would be the other way around. But because this is the parent giving the dependency, it re-renders every time. So
That's how you do a never-ending loop on React.
yeah, but again, this is something that you need to be aware of, because this can easily happen, of having some parent component re-render at every click, and that makes the child re-render as well. And if the child has children, makes their children re-render as well. So it's something that needs to be careful with. Yeah,
How can
exactly.
you kill the scope, or how can you stop, or how can you set that the scope should only be this, not include other children or any part of the component?
I mean, as long as you are using it here on as an object, you cannot do anything.
It's
I mean, you can always, of course, send a parameter and say, for instance, we could send the timeout value as a parameter and say like run every 2 hours only, so that it doesn't update every time. But that would not be the best case scenario. The best case scenario would be not to have this.
it's the mean how you structure your code actually.
Yeah, exactly. Because as you can see, we can very easily do bad code just by forgetting that, oh, this one is doing something every. I mean, in here it's visible, but now imagine that it's like you're calling an API, and it's something you don't see on the website, right? You don't see it, and you're calling it, and then every time someone, for instance, clicks here, all the children are calling that API.
Oh,
That's insane to do. That's crazy to do, but
Well,
that's very easy to achieve, like without.
Good as API is the phone number.
we have an application. I have an application on my work computer. It's a cosigner. It's something to print out labels for shipping. And then before I understood a little bit about API, I would say, oh man, what a slow software. Now it's like when I click browse or try to put stuff that's already saved on the database, it doesn't come and it freezes and says, somebody gotta fix this fucking bad API. It's like,
Now you know the term.
Now I know the term. It's like, what a bad API this thing is.
Then in the future people will speak bad about you if you create a bad API.
It's horrible. It's just horrible.
Yeah, but again, for instance, you can imagine like usually it's different teams doing different things, and you can imagine like the team that develops the
that's
API
the case.
also needs to make security for something dumb not to be done from the front end. Because if the front end calls the API every half a second to get the exact same data, then we want to be slow. We want the front end to say calm down. That you should not do that. And again, in a very small amount of example, we made terrible code that would do that. So that's something to also be aware of.
I don't
Are things being
understand.
updated or not?
I don't understand because let's say you make, let's say, you select the service, whatever, maybe you can use multiple couriers, and then you create like a contact, right? Like just like a contact, like you create a contact on the account in your Outlook, whatever. And then you save the contact with the preferences, the courier, and everything. And then you put like you can give a custom customer name, right? So I give a customer name, and then next time you just type in the customer name, and the whole address gets populated automatically, the whole thing. And sometimes it works just fine. You just type in the customer name that I knew, that I saved it. Now it's like when I try to do it, it just freezes and it loads and you can't load, you can't find the data, and then it's just like, who made this thing?
But sometimes those things are made on purpose to be like that, because one system might depend on several systems, and you don't want to pay servers for everything to be running all the time. So the first person to come in is the one who pays the price for all the rest. The first person comes in and everything is slow, but the servers are starting. And now the servers are there. So if you go there right after, your response is fast. But then after an hour of no one going there, the servers go down again, because why should you be paying for something that nobody's using?
Yeah.
And there you have a slow system, but it's made by design. and then it becomes expensive, of course, to have everything running all the time. Nobody wants to pay for that because it is very expensive.
But that when you build your server on the cloud, you mean? Or in like when you have physics, for example, if you have the company.
Even in a company, a lot of the times you need space for things to run. Things takes memory from a machine. So you don't want it always running. Some things, of course, you do, right? You do want it to run, but other things you don't. We want to be slow because, again, if we have 2 users a day, you want to pay for 24 hours uptime? Nope. Like, it's a bit.
Yeah, but that's why when you speak about uptime, because it's when you have your server in the cloud, you're paying for the time and you're paying for the uptime and something like that. But if you have like your server in your company,
Yeah, you're paying for the space. It takes a lot. A website takes a lot of space. No, I mean you don't shut down the server. No, but if you have a system there.
24 hours, your electricity bill.
Oh, believe me,
Yeah.
when a server goes
There's a
down,
lot.
like in our warehouse, when they deploy like a hot fix or something, that it doesn't work. I mean, imagine it's like 15 of these
Marcos,
buildings
so
here
the
running
scope of
on
the life cycle
technology,
books
you
is
know,
per
like
component.
this huge
It will not
Yeah.
go outside the other
No, it-
components.
warehouse running.
Yeah, actually, that's an important
Server
thing.
goes down, my friend. The thing is just
This cannot
it
be
stops.
even used outside of the function component.
The whole thing
Ah.
stops.
For instance, we cannot do this, and it's not only because this is not there. For instance, if we have, okay, we are not calling the set, let's say. This is not valid, as you can see on the error message. It, yeah, and it is a bit. It explains what's happening. It says that it cannot be called outside of the function. So any hook can only be called. Wait, let me not lie.
You want hookers to outside.
Let me try not to lie.
You want
Can
the hookers to
only
get outside.
inside rules. Yeah, it's rules.
Should be always under control.
Yeah. So, and yeah, there's only basically two rules about hooks that are very, very important. That can only be called inside of the function where they are being used, or they can actually be called from other hooks. But again, we won't be doing custom hooks for now. We can do it. I think in one of the last lessons probably we'll do it. But yeah, it belongs to the function that we are using. That's why, for instance, if you see, maybe I'll try to hide the browser. What happened here? Okay. Close. Can I close just this one? Yeah. Okay. So if we go to repositories, for instance, and header. Yeah, repositories is using state, but is using it inside of it. The header is using state twice, but for different purposes. So, I mean, it would be better to have a lot of hooks in one than try to share them, because that's not okay. That's supposed not to be allowed. Probably you can go around it somehow, but you should not never do that, because again, one component should never influence others unless it's children. Because it's the same thing that is happening, for instance, here, like this component, git home, is only influencing its children. And now header and repositories, they don't have any connection anymore. They are complete, like they cannot influence each other this way. They will at some point, but for now, let's just say the way we know, they cannot influence at all, because header only influences its children, and repositories only influences its children, which is repository and buttons and whatnot. So it's always like from parent to children, and parents should not share children. I think that's.
Family always
I think that's the rules everywhere. I don't know.
Family always gives you problems.
Yeah, but
Let me call my parents.
People outside the family should not relate to me. Only parents.
Exactly.
We done today?
Okay. I mean, from what I can see from here, I guess so.
Yeah.
I will